Ever feel like traditional therapy or coaching, it's like wading through mud, like you're putting in the work, going to the sessions, but the problem's just kind of lingering out there.
Yeah, it can definitely feel that way sometimes.
Well, what if I told you there might be a way to fast track those breakthroughs? That's what we're diving into today. Minimum Optimum Service, or MOS.
Ah, MOS, I like it.
Yeah.
It's all about, like you said, getting the absolute most out of the time you invest. Think of it as like laser-focused personal development.
Right. Maximum impact, minimum fuss. And our source material for this deep dive is actually a training guide for something called Advanced Conversational Hypnosis. And right away, it kind of calls us out on this assumption that more always equals better results.
More sessions, more homework, more time spent.
Exactly. That somehow that has to equal a better outcome. They even use this analogy of like going to the dentist, right?
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So say you've got a toothache and one dentist is like, I can fix that for you in 20 minutes, but it'll cost you an arm and a leg. And another one says it'll take months of appointments, but it'll be super cheap.
Most of us would probably go for the faster option, even if it's more expensive.
Exactly. And the guide's point is that we've been kind of conditioned to think that way in a lot of areas of life, especially when it comes to this whole personal development thing.
So are they saying we've been doing it wrong this whole time?
Well, they're definitely challenging the status quo. So if this MOS approach is all about getting to breakthroughs faster, why does it seem like so much of traditional therapy or coaching is stuck in that slower, more drawn-out model?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the guide points to a pretty big issue. A lot of the traditional approaches, they end up just addressing the symptoms, not the actual root cause.
Like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're treating the surface, but not what's going on underneath.
So where is this mysterious root cause hiding, according to the guide?
Deep, deep down in the unconscious mind. And that, my friend, is where Advanced Conversational Hypnosis, or ACH, comes in. It's like the key to unlocking this whole minimum optimum service approach.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. So tell me, how does this ACH actually work to get us down to that unconscious level?
Well, the first thing you gotta understand is this guide's working from the idea that everyone, and I mean everyone, can be hypnotized.
Okay, now I know what you're thinking, swinging pocket watches, people clucking like chickens.
Right. But here's the thing. ACH throws all that out the window. We're not talking about stage hypnosis here.
So no sparkly vests or mind control.
None whatsoever. This is about using the power of conversation, actual talking, to tap into that unconscious mind. No scripts, no weird pre-session rituals, you just dive right in.
So instead of spending weeks in therapy talking about the problem, ACH can actually give us access to the part of our mind that knows the solution. That almost sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, it's a big claim, for sure. But that's really what this guide is getting at. And the key here is that with ACH, it's not the therapist who's fixing you.
They're not waving a magic wand or anything?
Right. It's more like they're guiding the conversation in a way that lets you uncover those unconscious insights.
Those aha moments that really shift things.
Exactly.
I'm really curious about those insights. What's that actually look like in practice? Does the guide give any examples?
It does. There's this one analogy I really like. They talk about a tangled up ball of yarn.
Okay, I can picture that.
So those tangles, those are like your unconscious conflicts. The beliefs that are driving your behavior, they call them unconscious knots.
Interesting.
And ACH, through these targeted conversations, it helps you identify those knots, figure out how they got all tangled up in the first place.
And then hopefully untangle them.
Exactly. And the guide says that's where those aha moments pop up during that untangling process.
Okay, I'm starting to get how this all fits together. So we're not just talking about the ball of yarn from the outside. We're actually getting in there and unraveling those knots ourselves.
You got it. And because you're dealing with the root cause directly, the guide says the results tend to be much stronger, longer lasting. It even suggests you might only need 1 or 2 sessions to work through something that could take months of traditional therapy.
Wow, that's efficient. But I have to ask, doesn't something get lost if we're condensing therapy down that much?
That's a common concern, but it's important to remember we're not talking about trading depth for speed here.
Okay, so it's not a shortcut, exactly.
Right. It's called minimum optimum service for a reason. It's about figuring out the absolute minimum intervention needed to get the best possible result.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I did notice the guide has that diagram comparing traditional therapy with this MOS model. Can you walk me through how those two look visually?
Sure. The traditional model, They've got it as this linear progression,
Yeah.
often stretched out over a bunch of sessions.
Right, you've got your initial consult, then you spend weeks, maybe even months, talking about the issue, processing emotions, coming up with coping mechanisms, and then eventually you work towards some kind of resolution.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
Now, the MOS model is totally different. It's more of a streamlined, circular process,
Yeah.
and it often happens within a single session.
Wow, okay. How does that work?
So you start with investigation, figuring out what those unconscious knots are. Then you move into untangling, where you're really getting that aha insight into those knots and how they're affecting you. And then there's this phase of testing and integration.
Testing and integration, what does that involve?
Basically, you get to try out those new insights right there in the session. You see how they feel, how they change things.
Wait, so you're experimenting with these new ways of thinking and behaving right then and there. That's so different from the traditional therapy model.
Exactly. And the guide says it's a really crucial part of the MOS approach. Instead of waiting a whole week to see if something works, you get to test it out in real time and adjust if you need to.
That's incredible. So, to recap, we're accessing the unconscious mind, untangling those knots, and even testing out new ways of being, all within 1 or 2 sessions. I mean, what's the catch? It really does feel like this MOS approach turns everything we thought we knew about therapy and coaching on its head, right? I mean, shorter sessions, getting to the root of the problem quickly, it all sounds amazing. But what about all those tools therapists usually use? Like, where do those fit into this model?
That is where things get really, really interesting.
Mm.
This guide's take on those traditional tools, well, it, it's probably one of the most surprising things about it.
Okay, now you've got to tell me more. What does it say?
It basically says ditch them.
Ditch them? All of them?
The scripts, the NLP, any kind of predetermined timelines, even stuff like regression therapy.
Yeah.
The guide says chuck it all out the window.
Wow, that's pretty radical. So if you're not using any of those tools, what is guiding the session? Like, how do you even know where to begin?
That's where the trust comes in. You have to trust the process of conversational hypnosis itself. The idea is if you create the right environment, that safe and supportive space for dialogue, well, the unconscious mind, it kind of naturally gravitates towards the core issue.
So no more pre-planned strategies or anything. You just kind of go with the flow of the conversation.
Exactly. And I know that probably sounds a little, I don't know, unstructured, maybe even a little scary.
A little bit, yeah.
But the guy actually argues that it's that very openness, that lack of structure, that's what creates the space for those really deep, really powerful breakthroughs to happen. It's about trusting that your unconscious mind already knows what it needs to heal. And the therapist, their role is really just to help you tap into that.
I can see how that would be really powerful if you could just kind of let go and trust the process.
It's about letting go of that need to control everything, to have it all figured out in advance.
So this MOS approach, with this whole emphasis on conversational hypnosis, on minimal intervention, it really is like a completely different way of thinking about therapy, isn't it?
It really is.
But for someone who's only ever experienced that more traditional structured approach, it could be a little bit daunting, don't you think? Like, they might be intrigued by this MOS thing, but hesitant to just jump in head first. What would you say to those listeners who are kind of on the fence about it all?
I think that's totally understandable.
Mm.
I mean, it's new, it's different. And to be clear, this guide isn't saying those other tools and techniques are bad or that they don't work. Not at all.
Okay, so it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. It's more about opening up our minds to different ways of thinking about therapy, about personal growth. This approach, it really prioritizes that direct line to the unconscious mind, and it values efficiency. The great thing is it encourages us to kind of question those assumptions about how therapy should look, to explore all these different possibilities out there, and ultimately to find what works best for us as individuals.
I love that. It's all about finding your own path. So if you could sum it all up, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners will take away from our deep dive into minimum optimum service?
I hope they come away realizing that transformation doesn't have to be this long, drawn-out process. It doesn't have to be a struggle. There are approaches, like this MOS model, that challenge the traditional way of doing things, and they offer a faster, more direct route to creating real, lasting change. So don't be afraid to explore those different paths to find what resonates with you personally.
It's about taking your power back, remembering that you're in control of your own journey.
Absolutely.
And sometimes the most effective solutions, they're the simplest ones. Like they say, less can be more. Well, that's all the time we have for our deep dive today.
Until next time.